Welcome to Strange Coordinates, the show where we use brands as roadmaps to arrive at surprising places. I'm Topher Burns.
And I am Robert Baylog. Topher and I founded an advertising agency called Territorial. And what we do is we help brands find their place in the world. And we do that by exploring how history and culture and desire and all these types of things bounce off of one another to reveal insights about what is cool about being human.
Darn tootin'. Every episode, one of us gives the other a brand to explore. And that person has to go trek into the wilderness and come back with a story that they find to be most compelling. It's using brands as compass points to discover more about the world around us.
Last episode, it was my job to give Topher a brand to explore. And I've got some visual clues for those of you who didn't see it last time. Topher does as well. I'm sipping a warm beverage and I have a afghan on my lap. And the brand that we chose was Celestial Seasonings.
Indeed. And it's what inspired me as well to delve into the psychedelia with this t-shirt. But I like that we've both sort of taken it in different visual directions.
Yeah, I'm leaning into the art on the Celestial Seasons packaging, which involves bears in old-timey pajamas and things like that. And Topher is taking it in a direction that I'm a little scared of, to be perfectly frank.
Well, I mean, what you're talking about, we're going to cover it all. I'm curious, before we sort of like start to dive into this, when you and I talked about this on the last episode, you said that you were scared that there might be, at the root of this, a sort of patchouli scented, very sort of coarse clothing wearing hippie behind all of this. Are you still scared about that?
I mean, scared is a strong word. I think that I just have an aesthetic reaction to the Celestial Seasonings oeuvre. And I would love to see that this is a story that has, really great ecological roots, and there's thoughtfulness behind the brand, and they're connected to using the bounty of the earth in responsible ways. So that would be the best outcome. The less good is off-gridder, who started kind of just foraging in their yard and then turned that into a tea empire.
Interesting. Well, I'm kind of going to give you both. And so a lot of what you described is exactly what we can get into. And we'll just kind of see where it leaves us, and maybe we can see how you're feeling about the brand at the end of it.
Amazing. Well, you know this, I'm a huge tea person. So I'm very excited about this just on a categorical level. I think this is going to be exciting. I love tea. Tea is my morning drink.
Let's get into it. 1969, humble beginnings. This is where we're going to touch on some of the areas that you mentioned.
Summer of Love, yeah?
Oh, was that the year?
It might have been 68, I'm not sure.
Well, it was a great summer, and in that summer, one Mo Siegel was out on the slopes of the Rockies, hand-picking and foraging for herbs.
Mo, did me dirty, Mo, right out the gate.
So Mo was based in Boulder, Colorado, and he was foraging for these herbs and putting them into his first product that he was selling to local health food stores. It was a blend of 36 different American alpine herbs and plants that were in hand-sewn muslin bags. And
it was like exactly as I feared.
It's precisely what you thought was going to be happening. He then expanded his line into doing a 24 instead of a 36. I'd imagine that cut down on the labor. It started becoming popular, and it really quickly kind of went from that crunchy beginnings. Then the things that were really popular were the Sleepy Time tea, which was born in, I believe, 1970 or 1971. And that became
right around the time Quaaludes and barbiturates too. People were really into downers at that time. So
I mean, people were kind of into it all, and probably, this was just a different version of that. So you go from this humble beginning really quickly into a success story. By 1984, the Celestial Seasonings brand was sold to Kraft. And it actually bounced back out of Kraft because Kraft tried to sell it to Lipton, and Bigelow said that's an antitrust problem, didn't want to have to face them. And so then it kind of like, there was a leveraged buyout. Celestial Seasonings team got together with like a capital team, a VC team, and then they spun Celestial Seasonings back out on its own in 1989. And it has kind of been continuing and accelerating since then. They now sell 1.6 billion cups of tea per year. And they really created a category in America. Before Celestial Seasonings, there really wasn't a mass herbal tea line.
Right.
Tea was just tea plant tea. And it's not like they invented that in human history. Certainly indigenous cultures, even folk medicine in European histories, have all made tea from things that aren't just the tea leaf. But this is kind of America's first crack at a mass available herbal tea.
And so Celestial Seasonings is all herbal?
No.
They don't do... Okay.
But that's how they created the category.
Was Mo especially qualified to do this? Did he have a background in making anything edible?
That's
just a man who loved to wander the fields, like, I guess. He just liked to be in the fields.
I'm going to get into some of his inspiration in just a bit.
Okay, cool. For now, he'll be like Maria at the beginning of Sound of Music, just spinning on the hilltops.
Well, and then laughing all the way to the bank. We know where this story ends. You know, it's as if Maria had somehow figured out how to sell her story to the highest bidder and maintain control of her IP.
I want to say this is the second time we've had a Julie Andrews reference to Sound of Music in a podcast.
And neither have come from me.
That's not even true. That's not even true.
What? When did I
the last time I brought up the Best Buy being called Sound of Music, and you brought up Julie Andrews.
Yeah, that's on me. Well, you did say Sound of Music.
Sure.
So, next I want to take us to basically, this history is interesting and nice and good to know where it all comes from. But I want to lead you through kind of the personal journey that I went on the moment you said, this is the brand. And I set aside some time and then started to dive in.
Oh, I'm excited. This is great.
So I type in Google, Celestial Seasonings. And I always like to press space after something that I'm searching, just so that I can see what the auto-populated results are, to see what does it say that it thinks my next word is going to be. Sure. And I want you to guess what Google's top search result was for that.
Smoking.
No. But it also wasn't tea. It was cult.
No.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, that's great.
So
I should have said there's a cult. I should have known there was a cult behind this. We talked about this. Yeah, this is,
So in order to describe to you why this is the first auto-populated word, the way that this comes about is because there are like so many Reddit posts like, today I learned cult. So many TikTok videos like, did you know? So many listicles that are like top brands that are involved in cults, etc. So I obviously had to learn more about it. And in order to find out more about it and to share that with you, we're going to have to delve into something called the Urantia book.
Oh my goodness.
So follow me back to 1911 in Chicago.
Okay.
There's a Dr. Sadler. He and his wife are both very well educated and upstanding members of the community. And in 1911, Dr. Sadler gets a call from his neighbor. It's a couple, and it's the wife that has called him. And she says, my husband has fallen into a trance or a sleep or a coma, and I can't wake him up, and I'm really worried. Dr. Sadler goes over and tries to rouse him, but to no avail. eventually the husband does wake up, and he's fine. He doesn't remember anything about it, but these spells begin happening more and more. And eventually the husband that is in the trance, the neighbor, he also begins speaking. And that's when Dr. Sadler begins having conversations with who he eventually thinks of and designates as extraterrestrial beings that are channeling through this man who is in sort of deep trance. Those conversations are things that he forms a little loose group of curious, like-minded, educated people in the Chicago area. And between the times of, I believe, the 1920s through the 1950s, he and this group of people are formulating questions to ask these entities and then recording the responses.
Question: What kind of doctor was Dr. Sadler?
Medical doctor.
Okay, this is really interesting because like I feel that medical doctors as a profession was so relatively new at that point that somebody could consider themselves a man of science, but also think they're talking to extraterrestrial beings at the same time. They're like, well, I don't know, we only have so many answers, so maybe it's just channeling ETs.
Yeah. Well, the Urantia book is basically an attempt to sort of do exactly what you're describing, which is they're pulling in what they know of science at the time with what they believe in a religious and spiritual context, with sort of speculative or forward-looking types of fiction, and creating something that is still, as you look into the Urantia book, like 90% of it is just basically finding ways that you could use scientific thought to still say, like, but Jesus is still totally a thing. God is still the tripartite entity. Adam and Eve still existed, but so does evolution. And so they're kind of trying to pull together how you can learn about astronomy and the movement of the planets and the relationship of stars, and but you could still think of like there being a God. So it's really, if I would say, any sort of like centrist, sort of average American Christian, if you read 90% of what's in the Urantia book, you'd be like, like, okay. There are some parts that aren't as great. So if we think about that period of scientific time, there are some, at the same time that we're sort of like figuring out how evolution might relate to humans and that type of stuff, we're also doing things like justifying eugenics.
Of course.
And that definitely pops up in the Urantia book. They thought that humans were sort of created on a spectrum from red to indigo, and that indigo were the inferior. And so, like, obviously they labeled the black people the indigo. And they said that, it's a natural thing to look and see that, like, some types of races are better, like, further along evolutionarily, and therefore deserve dominion over, etc. Dr. Sadler's wife was a big proponent of a lot of like the nastiest components of eugenics. It's not a huge part of the thing. It's not, but at the same time, it's kind of like, it's definitely there. You're not supposed to be gay. You're not supposed to be brown. You're supposed to be sort of like a straight white person. And if the whole world was made by just like straight white people, then we'd be much better.
Like science and religion agree in this. They come together in this book to verify that this is the way it's supposed to be.
Yes. Now, the Urantia book is something, it's a group of kind of like, it forms a central component of kind of like a group of people who are kind of, as it continues to gain in popularity, the people who are attracted to it are kind of the same types of people that were attracted to it at the beginning. People who are into science, but people who are also into kind of maybe some like interesting versions of spirituality or thinking about forward-thinking science fiction. Eventually, during the Summer of Love, perhaps, Mo Siegel picks up the Urantia book. And he said that originally he thought it was kind of a joke, and by the end of it, he felt that there were, this is the most powerful book. And the Urantia book is when he thought to himself, how can I find a way to further the lessons and the impact that this book has had? How can I bring this to the world? Celestial Seasonings was his answer.
Oh
It's
goodness.
like, I need
This
to
is
make a tea company.
I feel vindicated. I feel justified and vindicated. I just want to say that.
Yeah.
I think that was my deep fear. Is beneath that veneer was uh, a modern day evangelical intention.
Well, so, and that's what I think is so interesting, is because the group formed around the Urantia book is not proselytizing. It's more like a reading group than it is really like
Sure.
a hardcore religion. And so they tend to wax and wane because, there will be like a central tenet of thought. Then everybody kind of disagrees and splinters off again. And like the book sales kind of fluctuate and stuff like that. So it's not like it's kind of like,
Right.
so it's interesting because it doesn't have that culty feel that you think
Yeah.
of when you think of kind of like what is a cult. There's a few other ways though that the Urantia book kind of like comes into the Celestial Seasonings. First, if you step back, Celestial Seasonings is a weird name, and you think it kind
Been
of
thinking
sounds
about that. Totally.
kind of
I've
sounds
been thinking about that
hippie.
since we. Yeah, I've been thinking about that since we first introduced this. Yeah.
Yeah. So purportedly, Celestial Seasonings, the name, was the flower name of somebody that Mo hung out with back in the day and thought it was a great name for a tea company.
Amazing.
Another thing I thought was interesting that I saw somebody
Yeah.
pointed out online was that their most popular tea,
Hmm.
Sleepy Time, is a
Right.
really interesting framing, and the picture of a bear in old school nightcap is
Yeah.
really interesting to think of in the context of a religion that was founded upon a turn of the century man, probably in a nightcap, who was asleep and couldn't wake up, and during his sleeps was
Oh.
receiving downloads
Right,
from
from Ursa Major or something like
yeah,
that.
yeah. So
Interesting.
that hasn't been publicly claimed, but I
Well,
think
I mean,
it's a really fascinating point.
we're not above misinformation here at Strange Coordinates, Topher, so let's put it out there as almost minted fact.
It's just, it's here to inspire. We're not here to put it on a Wikipedia page. Sleepy Time Tea is their most successful tea, and in fact has become a 10 product line that goes from like kid sleepy time all the
Uh-huh.
way through to like sleepy time decaf pomegranate blackberry green tea.
That's a
They've really taken it
that's
for
a
a
lot.
walk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, when you got a prize horse, you just gotta
Yeah.
breed it. You know what I mean? Just I
Yeah.
don't even know what that means. I'm not actually a horse rearer, so I don't even know if that's the case.
I
but
mean,
sure.
Yeah. See how far that DNA will stretch. So the other area that the Urantia book came into connection with everything that was happening at Celestial Seasonings is that early employees said that Mo and then another co-founder, John, both would refer to the Urantia book as sort of like the values of the company and sort of refer back to that and guide them through decisions or sort of internal practices and stuff like that, which I think if you hear that, you're like, that sounds pretty culty. But if you heard that somebody, at a company, and so many do, where they'd say like, we refer back to the Bible as the thing that guides our
Right.
decision making and stuff like that, it doesn't ring the alarm bells. So I think it's another situation where it's kind of like, well, what decisions did it lead them to make?
Sure.
And one of the areas that I don't know, I had to be reminded of this, but one of the signatures of Sleepy Time is that all of the tags have little aphorisms, little moments of encouragement, little sayings that help you feel comforted and relaxed. And apparently, the root of all of those is in the Urantia book. So the Urantia book kind of like inspired all the sayings that were shared on the Sleepy Time tea bags.
This is what I'm saying. Like yes, you're right. There is an equivalence between things that we designate as cults and things that we say are mainstream religions. But like, I don't love it going to In and Out and seeing the Bible verses on the bottom rim of the glasses. You know, that's not why I go and get a hamburger. So like, I'm totally with you on this is the pot calling the kettle black of the same. But at the same time, I don't want that in my consumption, basically. You know what I mean?
I think it's a really interesting question that kind of relates to exactly what you're talking about. What is our comfort level with how belief systems are pulled into brands and then fed back out? How much are we comfortable there? Because it happens. We talk about brand values as something that every brand needs to have, every company needs to have. And so what's the line that we're comfortable with?
Yeah, that's really interesting because in some ways brand values are the creation of a small dogma. They're like a self-contained dogma that this organization upon which this organization operates. And I think we're all comfortable with that, but we're maybe less comfortable with taking an established dogma and then having that be the thing that guides the commercial organization.
Yeah.
It's really interesting, Topher.
It actually led me to start to search other companies that have cult connections or belief system connections and starting to dive into that. And what was interesting is that in the food space and in the health space, you see this again and again and again, where these types of connections come up and we have these conversations about our comfort with how close these two things are. And so if you're open to it, I would like to take you outside of the tea category and into another category.
I'm glad I brought the afghan because I feel like I need to get myself ready for something scary and unfamiliar.
It's not scary, but it may be surprising. I'm curious how much you know about the origins of the Kellogg Company.
I know nothing about the origins of the Kellogg Company.
Oh, okay, good. Okay, this is fun one. So we're gonna go to the 1850s through to sort of like the like early 1900s. In this time, what we're seeing is drastic changes in the American food system. The way that we procure food, the way that we distribute it, the way that we prepare it and consume it. Prior to the 1850s, most people in America don't live in cities. They live in a variety of villages, farms, etc. And breakfast isn't there's no such thing as a breakfast food. There is just food. You don't wake up and have a very special different thing than you would have later. You need a big hearty meal because you're probably going to go out and do a bunch of manual labor.
Yeah.
As we move into more industrialized forms of food and food distribution, we have retained these diets that are kind of omnivorous. And so you read articles of people saying you're just as likely to have a steak and a slice of pie for breakfast as you are for dinner at this time. But your access to those is accelerating like crazy. And so dyspepsia, which is sort of a blanket term being used for all sorts of digestive upsets, becomes sort of the health crisis of the day that everybody frets about, in the way that now you just offhand hear people say, well, the obesity crisis. This was the dyspepsia crisis that had arisen out of nowhere and is ruining lives.
And gurgling was deafening across the United States. Just an absolute roar of malcontent stomachs.
And so everybody's kind of trying to figure out, they're eager for cures. They're looking for what to do differently. And that is where Dr. Kellogg steps in and says...
I feel like the doctor term was just thrown around for 100 years. You know, everybody's a doctor.
Yeah,
What'd you do? You graduated from 9th grade? Well, you're a doctor.
Maybe so. It does seem like it was kind of like... It does seem like it was a little easier to become. You sort of had to be intellectually curious and white and male. And then you could probably get in, no problem.
Sure.
So Dr. Kellogg says that the reason why not just our digestive problems, all sorts of societal ills are based upon the diet. Um, and to him, he said, we need to go back to eating things for our weaker constitution because we're overloading it. And when we
Mm-hmm.
overload our diets and our digestion becomes skewed, that doesn't just relate to burping. That relates to mental health issues, that relates to
Right.
violence, and that relates to the number one thing he felt the strongest about:
Which was,
masturbation.
I mean, this wouldn't be a strange coordinates episode if we didn't touch on some sort of prurience around sex.
I, I, you know what? Sorry, but I'm not
There's
sorry.
no sorry, not sorry. No.
So basically, he designed an entire diet that was super, super simple and pared down. And he had like these like health clinics and spas that people would go to, and
Uh-huh.
specific diets he made for everybody. And that's where Kellogg's cornflakes comes from.
Uh-huh.
Cornflakes were super simple, no sugar added,
Right.
just corn and water used to process it and then toast it up. Apparently the texture was very, very bad back in the day, like not the same sort of like delightful crunch we have today.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It was really, really difficult to
I can
eat.
imagine.
But there were sort of results that people had because they started switching from eating massive amounts of meat and cream and
Right.
sugar for every meal. Once they started swapping in something that was like more of a whole grain, more of a basic thing for one of their meals,
Uh-huh.
it started to balance out diets a little bit more.
Right.
And so it also fit into something that was changing around that time, which was a convenience breakfast. People wanted something that was really fast and easy, that was shelf stable, that could fit in our new stores that we had. And so he created basically the line, the category of cereals was like
Right.
sort of birthed from this movement. His brother also started his own cereal company. One of his assistants started Post with grape nuts. Um,
Huh.
so everywhere, kind of like in that area, starts creating really basic grain based meals
Mm-hmm.
that are designed not just to make your tummy feel better, but to make you a more law abiding, even keeled, um, like
Yeah.
less upset person. And when you're not upset, you don't have to engage in non reproductive sex, and you don't have to sort of like engage in violence or be distracted from your like
Right.
more logical, natural higher self.
Uh-huh.
So what this made me think of more is how emotionally complicated the concept is at a cultural and then even personal level, with the idea of taking something into your body and into yourself to change yourself,
Yeah.
to make you feel better, to adjust yourself, not just physically, but spiritually.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in Western culture, we tend to divorce food and medicine. We tend to think of them as separate things. They are legislated in different ways. They are in different parts of our stores, in different parts of our homes.
Yeah.
But that's not actually how most human thought has arrived. Indigenous cultures don't think of medicine as being different than food.
Right.
Ancient Chinese traditions, Vedic traditions, those all think about food and medicine as being part and parcel of the whole way that we navigate ourselves
Mhm.
through the world. When I think about that, it frames the idea of the sort of wellness category, but also just like food in general and where we're moving in different ways. It makes me think differently about Kellogg and thinking how what you put in your body can affect your behavior. We know that to be true, whether or not we're worried about who's
Sure.
doing what,
Right.
in which tabs of their browser late at
Timmy's been
night.
in the outhouse too long.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Um, and like, I think the same about Celestial Seasonings.
Mm-hmm.
And so the fact that those kind of like start to percolate here, I think is interesting. It also
Yeah.
takes me to, sorry, pause for comment.
I was just gonna say, like, there's a religious precedent, obviously, because like if you think about the sacrament of communion and the idea of taking
Mm,
the body and blood of the Savior into your own body as a redemptive act on a sort of higher plane spiritual level, there is a precedent for that thinking, which then gets kind of scrubbed and sanitized in commercial culture. But like there's that root is in Western thinking.
that's so true. It even took me then to sort of not only do we have like components of that still baked into our culture, but then I thought about how the idea of a cult religion we think of as bad, but the idea of a cult brand we think of as very good.
Right. Yeah.
And then I thought about the words that we use in this space: conversion,
Hmm. Right.
evangelist,
Right.
community. These are words that we
That's
naturally
so true.
associate. And and maybe it's just late stage capitalism, but
Yeah.
because we're comfortable with brands playing in a space that is emotional, that gives a sense of
Hmm.
belonging, that reflects how we want to interact with the world, there we're fine with being a brand evangelist. We're
Yeah.
fine with talking about converting people and as customers. We're fine talking about brands as communities. And I think
Hmm.
that's really interesting that actually the language that makes us weird is that, like, oh, he pulled some of ideas from this book and put them on the
Right.
tea labels. But the things we're totally comfortable with are turning our brands into religions. I think that's fascinating.
You just made me realize I've been part of a cult for 20 years. So
Which,
the cult of advertising. We're basically we're basically cult members. It was abusive at times. I mean, I get it.
uh,
I'm putting it all together now.
yeah, it's, I
I
just think
mean,
it's a really interesting space that, like, where you take the word and what do you apply it to
yeah.
shifts how it feels. And it's not only advertising, a cult fan base in music
Sure.
or a cult hit movie, those are
Right.
also to be desired. And we think of them as being fun. You don't think of it as being like a bad experience.
Like
You
a
know,
cult classic.
yeah, like
Yeah.
we think of those as like, oh, it's a fun way for people to find community, to join around what they care
Right.
about, to create meaning. So I think it's a really it's there's an interesting duality there, or like a lot of space that like the word doesn't necessarily connote right away.
Well, this is amazing. You've drawn a connection between the Rocky Mountains and Rocky Horror Picture Show. So I really appreciate that journey you've taken us on.
Oh wow, that's excellent. That's
Oh,
amazing.
Rocky.
Oh, oh, I love that. That's so good. Um, this like so the the thing that like to me where this like really landed that
Okay.
also felt like it was kind of like if I'm thinking about like the opportunity for this sector, like if we think about where like
For
because
for tea or for
for tea and
yeah.
uh I think it's worth pointing out too that like Celestial Seasonings early in adopting a lot of stuff that drove the
Hmm.
category, but the categories kind of passed them by in a lot of different ways. Like in terms of like
Sure.
super high end tea experiences, in terms of like kombucha, in terms of like tea based supplements or tea based prepared
Yeah.
drinks. Like those aren't things you think of for Celestial Seasonings. There's lots of other people playing in that space. Dyspepsia.
Uh-oh. You better go masturbate.
No, I need. Or was that a sign that I have been the whole time?
Yeah, exactly.
I'll keep my hands up. Uh,
Hands where we can see them there, Topher.
um, so I think if I think about like what this idea of sort of like pairing meaning with food, how where that has popped up, the things that this has drawn for us, and especially in the tea space, I
Hmm.
think it's interesting that again and again, even going back to Kellogg's, this recognition of sort of like the way we interact with our food has a natural basis to it that cannot be
Hmm.
technologized, that cannot be
Right.
synthesized, mechanized, industrialized. And it highlights to me that we are looking for help as a culture of ways to find our way through that and to find some sort of like new ways to connect to nature. I think the rise of tea as something that is super, super popular with millennials again and more popular than it has been in generations here in the US shows you that like now we're thinking not just about like being healthier people, but we're also thinking about being healthier souls when we think about tea as a ritual, as a thing that helps
Yeah.
you relax.
It's really interesting you mentioned ritual, because the one thing I've been thinking about as you've been talking about this is that across cultures, tea is usually associated with some type of ritualistic behavior.
Mm,
So even in places like England, where that behavior would be an afternoon tea, and it doesn't feel like it's connected to nature, it's still this, as you mentioned, this sort of like awareness of this liquid as a vehicle for something. It's a
mm.
vehicle for a communal experience. It's a vehicle for a cultural experience. You know, you and I, when I was in Portland, we went to the tea garden, or the Japanese garden. We had tea at the tea house. And not that it was laced with a ton of ceremony, but there was still a lot of intention in the moment of just having the various types of tea with the snacks with them, and that sense of just focus and awareness that some plant matter sitting in hot water creates is almost otherworldly. It is a thing that connects you to something beyond that moment and the physical items that are there.
Yeah, totally. And I think, us being attracted to the idea of ritual as a sort of like a culture right now is totally connected to the fact that like we've destroyed so many, you know, we
Yeah.
we find ourselves kind of like searching for that circadian rhythm that an afternoon tea can give you because it's something you don't have to think about, but allows you to ground yourself in sort of a moment and
Yeah.
to find a little bit of space. Um, we live very different lives, but we find ourselves wanting a lot of the same things that we've wanted before.
Yeah. Yeah. Just steak for breakfast and constant masturbation.
It doesn't sound terrible. I don't know if I could do it for a year,
Yeah.
but could I have steak and pie for breakfast for 3 days? That would probably be my max.
When I was in high school, my folks went away, and I once had cake for breakfast, and by second period, I had a massive hypoglycemic like event where I basically blacked out in the hallway
I
because
forgot about that.
my blood sugar spiked so much. Yeah, so I
And did
learned the
you
lesson early on.
didn't you like didn't like the like nurse have to like help you figure that out or something?
I was like crawling along the lockers to try to find the nurse's office, because I got that vision that just kind of goes like that,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
and it was like sweating, and yeah, and she's like, how, why do you feel this way? I was like, I don't know. She's like, what are you eating today? I was like, three pieces of cake.
The nurse was like, "Haven't you heard of dyspepsia?"
Oh my god.
The so I'm curious if there are elements of sort of the Celestial Seasonings assignment or the tea experience that you were expecting us to delve into that we did not delve into.
I think I might be all brewed out.
Well, that means we're at as good a place as any for me to tell you the next brand that we'll be taking a look into.
All right, this is great. Okay.
Um, you know, we were just ruminating on a lot of sort of like internal facing, slower percolating types of connections, heady, philosophical, what truly is the way, how do we define religion and
Yeah.
what are the right languages for brands to use in order to talk about human connection. So I was interested to go in a very different direction. And
Okay.
I wanted a little bit of flash, a little bit of pizzazz,
Here for it.
a little bit of glamour. And so the brand that I want you to find us stories on is MGM,
Ooh, Metro. What's Metro
Goldwyn Mayer.
Goldwyn Mayer?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think.
All right, an entertainment property. This is cool.
Hmm.
Interesting.
There's a lot there.
I'm sure there is. We're going to connect to old Hollywood. There's going to be, yeah, this is great. There's going to be Cecil B. DeMille is going to show up. We're going
Ooh.
to, yeah, there's going to be all kinds of
Yeah.
fat cats.
And they do so many, they got their fingers in so many pies these days, but like there's the old historical stuff. And I'm
Yeah.
also really like personally curious about what are the things that you, Robert, are going to find the most interesting. I'm interested in what's the like Venn diagram of like
Right.
MGM plus Robert Baylog.
Yeah. It's just going to be all about the lion, basically. It's going to be
If that's all that it is, I'm super into that.
Okay, cool. All right. MGM, I'm excited. This is great. It'll be definitely flashier. I'm sure the book of Urethra will show up again because there's some sort of connection between them.
There's gotta be.
Positive.
Yeah, if we don't get to a cult in MGM, then we haven't looked deep enough.
Yeah, amazing. All right, well, that is going to be super interesting. And so for that, join us next time. You've been listening to Strange Coordinates. This is the show where we use brands as roadmaps to arrive at surprising and fascinating places like cults. Your hosts are Topher Burns and me, Robert Baylog. So to learn more about our agency Territorial, go to our website, weareterritorial.com. Boop. Join our mailing list. That'd be super awesome. And follow us on LinkedIn.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much, y'all.
Thanks,
We'll see
everybody.
you again. Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Wait, you had a glass of stuff the whole time? You didn't take one sip.
It was coffee too. I felt bad.